All right, 1 Corinthians chapter 10. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. This is not the place of the message today, but it's a starting point. The Bible is written in such a way that from time to time, the characters that God chooses to put in there and record the events of either their life or things that they did from time to time, there's a reason for it. And one of the reasons that God picks who he incorporated into the Bible and the events in their lives that he put in the Bible, it's to help us, to encourage us. Anybody in this Bible, whether it be Moses, whether it be Abraham, whether it be Jesus himself, if you took all the recorded incidents that the Bible has about them and were to condense them into real time. Take Jesus, for instance. One day he walked on water. One day he raised somebody from the dead. One day he had an argument with the Pharisees. One day he threw out the money changers from the temple. One day he did this. If you took all the things that the Bible lists that he did and condensed them into real time, it probably wouldn't take 2 weeks. So what did he do the other 33 years of his life? Well, the Bible doesn't say. It doesn't say what he did, except that one little incident when he was 12 years old. Doesn't say what he did from 12 to 30. It is a complete blank, his life. Nothing is listed in there. But there are things of other people's lives that are listed, and they're there for a reason. And one of the reasons that they're there is not just to record the events of what happened in that particular time, but they are meant to be an example and to an encouragement for us. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Look at verse 6. Paul says, "Now these things were our examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things, as they also lusted." So there are certain things that are recorded in the book that we can learn from them, or at least we're supposed to learn from them. Look over in verse 11, same chapter. "Now all these things happened unto them for ensamples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come." They're written for our admonition. So when Jacob goes through a certain incident in his life, that is recorded, whereas maybe 1,000 other incidents are not recorded, but that one incident is recorded for an example to us, either for good or for bad, to encourage or to warn or to alert or to find strength in something. One of the champions in the biggies of the Old Testament is a guy named Abraham. God, looking down through the corridor of history, he knew that ultimately his son was going to be born as a little baby. Not just God transformed from deity to some other little doodad, but that he was going to go through the whole process exactly like we do. 9 months in the womb, the birth, smack on the butt, the whole thing, and grow. He had to have a family, and he had to have a people of which to accommodate and to make this thing work the way he wanted to work it. So God, at the time that Abraham was living, he looked down, he sees the Egyptians, he sees the Chaldeans, he sees the Canaanites, he sees the Hittites, and he says, I don't like any of them from that respect. This is not what my boy is going to be born into. So he selects a man and a woman, Abraham and his wife Sarah. And he says, I'm going to separate you two. I'm going to lead you and bring you to a land of milk and honey. I'm going to set you down in here, and I am going to start a nation from you guys. Distinct, brand new, all your own. Because ultimately, my boy will be born into this nation that I'm creating right now. So God needs a family for his boy. So he picks one guy, one girl. He gives them unbelievable promises and encouragements. Look over in Genesis chapter 12. Genesis chapter 12. In Genesis 12, beginning at verse 1. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, this is before his name is changed to Abraham, get thee out of thy country. And his country, as you know, is modern day Iran. So technically, if you want to get real biological here, Abraham was an Iranian, just like Saddam Hussein. That's the easiest, most recognizable one that comes to mind, because we can all see pictures of him and we've seen him on TV and so forth. This is the exact ethnic origin that Abraham was, in Iranian, or Iraqi, sorry. So the Lord said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. That's pretty great. I mean, if you were to walk around, whatever it be, Huntington Beach, Tustin, wherever, if you were to walk around and you have this promise that anybody who curses you, I, God, am going to curse. Anybody who blesses you, I'll bless. You talk about somebody having your back. This is an amazing thing, because you figure he's going into a strange country. The people who are already there don't want him there. The land that God had promised him, it was their land to begin with, so they're not happy about that situation. So they're not happy, about the whole thing. Abraham kind of stuck in the middle. He didn't really go asking for this, but God wanted to prepare a family, and he wanted to do it in his own country, so he picks a spot. Today we know it as Israel. He says, I'm going to put you here. There was already somebody there in Israel. They didn't like the idea that Abraham was going to come in there. So God gives him that blessing. Those that bless you, I'll bless. Those that curse you, I'll curse. So he goes in with a big stick, as it were. Genesis chapter 15. He's going to elaborate on these promises here. Genesis 15, beginning at verse 5. Still talking to Abraham, still in the context of these promises. God has picked him from amongst the people of the world, and we don't know God's reasoning, but for whatever, God picked him. It says in verse 5, and he brought him forth abroad and said, look now toward heaven and tell the stars, if thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, so shall thy seed be. Because Abraham had a big hang up here. And I don't say that in a disparaging way. I don't mean that in a put down way. But he had a monster hang up, and that was he's 75 years old and he has no kids. Now, in that culture, that part of the world and in that time of history, the obvious blessing of God or the gods or whatever you were looking up to as your source of, benefit, it was a lot of kids. So if you happened to be the guy in the street that had 15 kids or so, you were generally thought of as the most blessed guy on the street. Because now you had 15 kids that when you're old and dottery and stuff and you can't do much, you got all these kids working for you and helping you out. Where the poor schmuck next door, he might not have any kids. And so when he gets old and dottery, he's got nobody to help him. Nobody to farm, nobody to till, nobody to reap, nobody to harvest, nobody to do this. Nobody to tend the sheep or the cows or the oxen. They got nobody. So the more kids you had in that culture and in that day and age was an indication that you were blessed of God. Here he is. He's 75 years old. He's got a wife of 65 years old. She cannot have kids anymore. She's gone way past that stage of her life. And he has no kids. And so when God approaches him, first thing he asks, where's my kids? And so after the deal was struck, basically, this is when God brings him out. He said, look to the stars. Can you number them? And God says, this is the number of kids you're going to get. Verse 6, and he believed in the Lord. 75 years old, doesn't have kid one. 65-year-old wife who can't have kids. God says, your kids are going to be more than the stars of heaven. It says he believed him. And that, the Bible says, and he counted it to him for righteousness. This is the line that Abraham crossed that made him what he was ultimately. He believed God. That's it. He didn't sit there and argue about the time of life. He didn't argue about the fact that, hey, she hasn't been childbearing for, 20 years, referring to his wife. He didn't say anything about his old age. God said, your kids are going to be as the stars of heaven, and he believed him. That's it. Simple as that. And that we know in life, trying to believe God for half the things that he promises, it's not that easy. We get hung up in a lot of different things. So the whole hang-up, and I don't mean that in a bad, negative way, but Abraham is hung up on the fact of kids. He has to have, he needs, and he wants kids. Part of this thing here has to do with the new land also. So not only does he take Abraham from his family, but he puts him in a strange land. He doesn't speak that language. He has nobody there that he can commune with, nobody there that's going to have his back, nobody there that's opening the doors of welcome to him. He's an intruder. He's an invader, basically, out to get their land. And so he's stuck. So he goes down and he follows God, and bless his heart, he's obedient. God says, get up, go. He gets up and goes. He gives him the deal about the kids being as the stars of heaven, and he believes them. But what happens? First thing going out the gate, when he gets into the new land, the land flowing with milk and honey, the land that God has chosen for him, the land that God will meet him there and be with him there, that land, first thing going out the gate. Genesis chapter 12. verse 10. And there was a famine in the land. And Abraham went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. When the Bible talks about biblical famines and stuff, in this culture, in this day and age, this was a monster biggie. People are dying. People are starving to death. It's not like, oh, California has a bad orange crop, now we'll get all of our oranges from Florida. Oh, Florida had a big cold snap, well, we're going to get our oranges now from Honduras. Oh, Honduras, had a big revolution down there, well, we'll get our oranges from Mexico. It wasn't like that in this day and age. If your crop thing went down, you're finished. There's no plan B here. So put yourself in Abraham's shoes. You're sitting there one day minding your own business, and somebody taps you on the shoulder. You turn around, it's God. And he says, hey, follow me. Okay. I'm going to take you to a new land. You and your wife are going to start a new family, and that family is going to become ultimately the 12 tribes of Israel, which are going to be the Israelites and the Jews, and they are going to welcome in my son 4,000 years from now. Okay, let's go. Head south. All right, here we go. Got my camels, got my sheep, got my oxen, and here we go. Got all our servants. We're hot to trot. He gets down in there and he says, well, what do we do now? God says, well, I don't know. Let's think about this for a second. Oh, I know. We got a famine going. Now Abraham said, when it says that these things are for our examples, what we read back in 1 Corinthians, it works for good and bad. Everybody's got warts. Everybody's got good parts in them. We also have bad parts in them. The Bible is very, very, very clear on this. It doesn't whitewash anything. Abraham, on one hand, it says, God showed him the stars of heaven, and it says, and he believed God. That's a big plus. He gets down into the land, and there's a famine. All of a sudden, he's not believing God so much now. Because the first thing he does, he splits down to Egypt, because they still had corn and wheat and so forth down there. He's got something to eat. He's got nothing to eat here. So he's not trusting God for this part of his life. He's trusting Egypt. So on one hand, he shows unbelievable faith in God by believing God. On the other hand, he shows that human aspect. The same thing that we go through. One day, we're all for God. Yeah, because things are going right. The next day, boom. The bottom falls out. What's our relationship with God at that moment? We get a flat tire. We miss the meeting. We miss the promotion. We can't make the house payment. They foreclose. Now we're out on the street. All because of a stupid flat tire? Now how do we reconcile our relationship and our feeling with God? Oh, well, we didn't get the flat tire. Oh, we got the promotion. Oh, we got now another house, a vacation house someplace. How's your relationship with God now? He's the greatest God I ever saw in my life. But when you got that flat tire and you missed the meeting and you lost out in the promotion and your house was repossessed, what's your assessment of God right now? You see how it goes? Our relationship with God, for the most part, is based on our things that happen to us. I guarantee if God would give you $1 million lottery tonight, you'd wake up the next day thinking God is the greatest God that ever lived. If you woke up that next morning and find out you had stage 5 cancer, well, what's my relationship with God now? It seems that everything that we go through is based on the external things that happen to us. They are examples, the good and the bad. Well, another consequence. he goes down into Egypt. And now he's going to exacerbate his sin, as it were, his unbelief in God. He goes down with Sarah, who is technically his half-sister. So you say, oh, well, that, you know, incest and inbreeding and stuff. At that point of the human tree, as it were, it is not nearly as divisive as it is now, and to where God actually had to put it in writing that, no, you do not marry your sister, and so forth. But in this period of human history, as far as the gene pool and so forth is concerned, it wasn't that big of a deal. Go back to Noah. I mean, obviously, Noah and those guys, the only ones left on the planet was their moms and their sisters, and so forth. That was it. And so, technically, she's his half-sister, Sarah. But they concoct a story going down in there. Abraham knows, I guess she's still a fox at 65 years old, because the first thing that Abraham is discussing with her on the way down is that he says, look, when the Egyptians get one look at you, they're going to want to kill me if they think that I'm your husband. So look, when they ask what our relationship is, don't tell them I'm your husband. I'm going to get killed. You tell them I'm your brother, because you're generally not going to, you know, you're not going to kill the guy that's just the brother. You'll kill the husband to get to the girl, but you're not going to kill the brother to get to the girl. So they concocted this story. So they lied through their teeth, and they had to pay a price for this. But it is recorded in here. That's the great thing about this book. On one hand, it's recorded that he believed God. The other hand, it's recorded that he lied through his teeth. So you, 4,000 years later, can look back in human history and read the story of Abraham, and on one part, you might be intimidated. You might not rise to that level of being able to manufacture or to squeeze out that level of faith that he did. But on the other hand, oh, guy lied through his teeth. Oh, well, I can relate to that. Who doesn't from time to time, and in some manner or some degree? So we can all look at that aspect of his life and say, yeah, I can relate to that. So they go down to Egypt for a while. The famine clears up. They go back, and he repents. He builds an altar to the Lord. He confesses his sin and so forth, and life goes on. Still no kids, though. 11 years go by. 11 years go by. Now him and Sarah are having another conversation. They're getting tired. You know, it's not a matter of getting tired of waiting for God. There's an element of, you know, use it or lose it type thing here. If she couldn't have kids at 65, well, at 76, it's not going to make it any easier on her. She still can't have kids. And he's 86 at this point. So they come up with this other new plan to help God out, as it were. Because again, in that culture, your servant was totally yours, committed, in every way possible. Physically, emotionally, whatever they did, it's yours. It even went so far as the fact that if your servant had a kid was yours. It's property. It's yours. So him and Sarah have this big old conversation. Look, 11 years ago, God promised the kids. Well, we don't have any kids yet. Good grief. It's been 11 years. What's he waiting for? And then Abraham says, well, there's a little loophole here. I know a little bit about law and culture and so forth. There's a loophole here that, there's Hagar, your servant, sitting over there, and she can have kids, I know that. Well, if I go in, and Sarah says, yeah, that'll work. And so they concoct this thing whereby Abraham goes into Hagar, and Hagar has the kid. Voila, problem solved. Because now the kid is technically Abraham and Sarah's. God says, no. That's not the way this thing is going to play out. You two are going to have kids. Not you and the servant, and you and Hagar, and all this convoluted tweaking of law and mores and so forth. You two. 13 more years go by. He's 99 now. She's 89. And you remember the story, how he's sitting in his tent one day. Sarah's inside the tent, and these three fellas come walking up the dusty trail. One of them is God the Father. The other two are angels. But they look like men. Smell like guys, look like guys, you know, the whole bit. Abraham doesn't really know. And God says to Abraham, this time next year. Now, finally, he puts a date to it. 24 years ago, it was just a nebulous, you're going to have a kid. Oh, okay, yay, yay, all happy and jumping up and down and so forth. But nothing happened, nothing happened. 11 years go by. They jump the gun. He takes Hagar. They have a kid. God says, no, 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 no. 13 more years go by, and now God commits. He says, this time next year, you're going to have a kid with Sarah. Sarah's inside the tent. She hears this. She just busts out laughing. Are you nuts? Have you looked at me lately? Did you take Biology 101? I can't have a kid. So she laughs about the whole thing. Time goes on. She does have the kid. Just exactly like God said. The exact time and so forth. Time goes by. Over the years, you can see Abraham mature. He has his good days, he has his bad days. One day he's believing God about the extent of the kids. The next day when the famine hits, he doesn't believe God. He doesn't trust God as such. And so, just like all of us, he's got some good points, he's got some bad points. But something has happened over the years. Because now Isaac, who was the son that they were waiting for, the one that kicked the whole thing off here, Isaac is a young man. He's probably, at this point, 33 years old. God comes to Abraham again. He says, Abraham, yeah. He says, you remember a long time ago when I told you that you were going to have a boy? Yeah. And eventually you got the boy? Yeah. And that boy was going to kickstart this whole thing about the stars of heaven and the sand of the sea as far as the number of kids that we're going to have. Yeah, I remember that, Lord. It's all right. I want you to take that boy. I want you to kill him. Put yourself in his shoes. What's your reaction? But you promised. But you said. But. I could just, I mean, the list is endless here of the things you can come back with. You said that this boy was going to kickstart the whole thing. You said that this boy was going to be the first one of the stars of heaven and as the sand of the sea. You said. Yeah, but now I'm saying kill him. Abraham, by the way, none of this went through his head. None of it went through his head. He says, kill him. Abraham didn't take 5 minutes running it by Sarah. Oh, gee whiz, Sarah, you're never going to believe this. God spoke to me today, and guess what he said we have to do? He didn't take 5 minutes telling her about it, asking her opinion, having a So he takes two of his servants. He takes Isaac. He says to Sarah, we're going to split for a 3-day journey. Me, Isaac, and the two servants. She says, okay. She didn't know what's going on yet. They take a 3-day journey. At the end of the 3 days, Abraham tells the two guys, two servants, you guys stay here. Me and my son, we're going to go up to the top of the mountain. So he takes the wood that the guys have been carrying, he loads it on Isaac's back. They get up to the top. And Isaac, we don't know on a practical level how much he knew as to what they were doing, why they were doing it. I'm sure that the first thing Abraham said was not, oh, Isaac, let's go on a 3-day hike, and by the way, once we get there, I'm going to slit your throat. I'm sure that conversation didn't come up. So Isaac gets up there. They're at the top of the mountain. He says, well, I see the altar here. I see the wood here. I lugged it up to the top of this hill. But where's the sacrifice? And Abraham looks at him and says, God will provide himself a sacrifice. When you eliminate everything else, all the other contingencies, all the other plan A, plan B, plan C, there's only one thing that kind of leaves, that has to remain. And that is that at the end of the day, Abraham had so much faith in God that for God to ask him to do what he was evidently asking him to do, to kill this boy. And since this boy was the personification of every promise that God had ever made, the only conclusion was, and I'm kind of reading into this a little bit, but I don't think it contradicts anything here. I think that in Abraham's mind, without the words maybe being articulated and the phrases being laid out, I think what went through Abraham's mind is, all right, I'm going to kill him, but God's going to raise him up from the dead. Because God said that this boy is going to kickstart this whole thing. And he doesn't have any kids yet, so he still has to be in play. He still has to be the one. So if I'm being asked to kill him, the only other alternative is God's going to raise him up from the dead again. And I think that thought hit him really, really quick, because he never bitched, he never griped, he never moaned, he never argued, he didn't do anything. He just said, yes, sir. Let's do it. And you remember the story. How he's laid out. Isaac's there. He's tied up. The wood's under him. Abraham is ready to come down with that knife. And on the downstroke, as he's coming down, God diverts his attention and he sees that ram caught up in the briar patch. And God says, whoa, 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 whoa. Get Isaac off there and put this one in his place. He says, now I know. That expression always bothered me when it says that God is speaking. And God says, now I know that, you're going to obey and so forth. Now I know. Now I know you're God. What do you mean, now I know? You didn't know a billion years ago? Before the earth was even a gleam in your eye? Now I know? Remember, he's always given us free will. And of course, he knew which way it was going to go. And so I think he said that, articulated that for Abraham's benefit. Just to encourage and assure him, now I know that you love God. You love me. That 3-day march that they took from where his homestead was to the top of that mountain, 2,000 years later, another dad led his boy up that same exact mount to the exact same spot that Abraham had laid Isaac out. That boy also carried wood up that hill. We call it a cross. That boy was sacrificed on that exact same geographical spot that Isaac was supposed to have been sacrificed. So Abraham, God the Father. Isaac, God the Son. Mount Moriah, Calvary. Isaac lugging the wood, Jesus lugging the cross. God will provide himself a sacrifice. And God did. It was God the Son laid out on that wood and shed his blood for you and me. James chapter 2. James chapter 2. There's a lot of titles in the Bible that people have gotten. One of my favorites is in regards to David. He is referred to as a man after God's own heart. And I'm not really sure exactly what that means, but I think it kind of means that when God looks down at David, he sees somebody like himself in the sense of, character or priorities or just something in the character and the heart and the soul of David. It strikes a response in God that God can relate to and God likes. There's another guy in the Bible called Esau. And it is recorded of him that God hates him. So you've got the whole spectrum throughout the Bible. But we read in James chapter 2, verse 23. It says, "And the scripture was fulfilled which saith, Abraham believed God, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness. And he was called the friend of God." What a deal. The friend of God. I mean, God, I don't know if there's anything that God needs, let alone a friend. What's he need a friend for? But this man touched such a chord in God the Father by his obedience, by his complete faith. And again, this is not interspersed with moments of humanness, with moments of, complete disaster, lying through his teeth about the relationship of him and Sarah, not trusting God to stay in the land that God had promised him, and, splitting down into Egypt and so forth. He had his warts just like we do, but the other parts of his character so touched the heart of God that God himself refers to him as the friend of God. What a deal. Imagine God just walking up putting his arm around your shoulder, just bringing you in with a big old hug and say, this is my friend. But it came at a price. 24 years after the promise was made, before the promise was fulfilled. 33 years after that, kill him. Complete obedience. He trusted God to that extent that the only logical thing was that if God wants me to kill him, that means that God's going to raise him from the dead. And this is exactly what happened, the analogy of God the Son. 3-day journey up to Calvary, lugging the wood, the cross, dying for you and me. And 3 days later, rising from the dead. These things were written for our examples. Read the book. Heavenly Father, when I look at such a thing as this that we call the Bible, I have, like everybody else, I've got mixed emotions. Sometimes I wonder why certain characters are mentioned in here and others are not. Why certain events in their lives are mentioned but others are not. You're very clear on the fact that you put the good in with the bad. And once you get to a certain stage or a certain point of your life, you can look back and it begins to make a little more sense. These things are written for our example. They are written that we can learn from their mistakes. They are written that we can look at their lives and we can see similarities in our lives. Times have changed, culture has changed, values have changed, but there are certain intrinsic things that never change. And we can learn by these guys. We don't dress like them, we don't speak like them, we don't live like them. But there are certain things, character-wise, that never change. And we can learn, whether it be from Moses or Abraham or Daniel or David, or just fill in the blank. But God, we have to read it. I get that. If we don't read it, then we haven't learned anything. We don't have an example to compare ourselves to encourage ourselves with, to warn us not to do this because, remember, this happened to so-and-so because they did it. And I think that's one of the great things that Satan has pushed on this generation. We just don't read the Bible the way we should. And so we don't have the roots, we don't have the foundation. We don't have the examples of good, we don't have the examples of bad. We're just drifting in our own little politically correct universe. God help us. You've told us, study, to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed. God, help us to take you up on that. Help us to trust you. In Jesus' name.